My name is Alex, and I was 28 years old when all of this happened at a ski resort in Colorado. I was living the kind of life that sounded exciting on paper, a traveling DJ working at vacation resorts. For the past year, I had bounced from sunny beaches in Mexico and the Bahamas to finally landing in the snowy mountains of Colorado for the winter season. It was the holiday rush, and the resort was buzzing with energy. My job was simple: on the surface: spin tracks, keep the party going, make people dance, and forget their troubles for a few hours. But it was more than that to me. It was about connecting with a crowd, creating a shared energy through music. It was about finding rhythm in chaos and bringing people together on the dance floor. I loved the feeling of dropping a track and watching the whole room erupt. I loved seeing people let loose, smiling, laughing, leaving their worries behind. It felt like I was giving them a gift, a temporary escape. It was hard work, long hours, late nights, but it had its perks, like living in cool places and meeting interesting people. The resort in Colorado was beautiful, nestled in the mountains, everything covered in a fresh blanket of snow. It felt like a different world from the beaches, but the job was the same: bring the noise, bring the energy. The usual manager for my team was supposed to be here, a guy named David who was experienced and cool-headed. He understood the flow of a good night, the importance of vibe. But David got held up at the Canadian border for reasons I never quite understood. So instead we got Mark. Mark was young, I think maybe 23 or 24. He was supposed to be an assistant manager, but with David stuck, he was suddenly in charge temporarily. And Mark was everything David wasn't. He was insecure, he was arrogant, and he loved the small amount of power he suddenly had. He strutted around like he owned the place, barking orders at staff who had been doing this for years. From the moment he arrived, I could tell he was going to be a problem. He didn't understand the resort life, the guest experience, the importance of the little things that made people happy. He only seemed to care about looking important and being in control. The nightclub where I worked was a hot spot, especially around the holidays. It was packed every night, bodies pressed together on the dance floor, the air thick with excitement, and the smell of drinks and sweat. My DJ booth was elevated, overlooking the main floor, a small kingdom of turntables, mixers, and speakers. People loved to come up to the booth, maybe flash a smile, make a request, sometimes just to chat and feel closer to the music source. It was part of the job, the interaction, the personality I brought to the role. I was good at it. I could read the room, know what track would hit next, keep the energy levels high. The ladies especially seemed to gravitate towards the booth, maybe because I played music they liked, maybe because the DJ is often seen as the center of the party. I always kept it professional, friendly, but focused on the music. Mark, however, saw this attention differently. He saw it as a threat, or maybe he was just jealous. He would stand at the edge of the booth area scowling. Then the directives started. Little comments at first: keep the girls out, Alex, focus on the music. I tried to explain that interacting with the crowd was part of building the atmosphere. It wasn't just about pressing play, it was about being a host, a guide through the night's soundtrack. He didn't get it. He just saw distractions. As the holiday week ramped up, the club got even busier. The energy was electric, every night felt bigger than the last. Mark's frustration seemed to grow with the crowds and the attention I was getting. He started giving stricter orders. No one in the booth except staff. Fine, I could work with that, though it felt unnecessary and went against the open vibe I preferred. Then one particularly packed night, maybe the night before Christmas Eve, the club was absolutely heaving. The music was on point, the crowd was wild, the energy was incredible. People were trying to get closer to the booth, waving, making signs for requests. A few regular guests, women who had been coming to the club all week and were friendly, would sometimes still try to get up there just to say hi or request a song they loved. I would politely tell them I couldn't let them in, but appreciated them stopping by. Mark was watching all of this, his face like thunder. He came up to the booth area, pushed through the small crowd there, and banged on the side of the booth. I paused the track volume slightly and leaned over. He was red-faced, yelling over the music. I need you to lock this door, Alex. Lock it right now. And you are not to open it for anyone. No one, do you understand? No staff, no guests, absolutely no one. I stared at him for a second. It was a strange order. The door wasn't usually locked, it just kept people from wandering in. Locking it seemed excessive, but he was the temporary manager. Okay, Mark, I said. I'll lock it. I reached over and flipped the lock on the door that led into the back of the booth area, the small space where I kept my gear and took breaks. He nodded sharply, looking pleased with himself for giving such a decisive command, and then he walked off, disappearing back into the crowd. I went back to the music, dropping the next track and getting the energy back up. The night continued. Hours flew by in a blur of beats and lights and dancing bodies. The locked door felt weird. It made the booth feel like a cage, isolated from the energy I was supposed to be guiding. But I followed the order. Maybe an hour or so later, there was a loud knocking on the locked booth door. I was in the middle of a mix, transitioning between two tracks, trying to make it seamless. The knocking got louder, more insistent. I ignored it for a moment, focused on my job. It continued, persistent, annoying. I glanced over. Through the small window in the door, I could see Mark. He was motioning for me to open up, looking agitated. I finished my mix, brought the new track up, and then leaned towards the door, not opening it. I motioned questioningly. He mouthed something I couldn't hear over the music, but pointed emphatically at the door. He wanted in. I shook my head and pointed to the lock. My expression probably read as, "You told me not to open it for anyone, Mark." He banged on the door again, harder. He was clearly getting angry. He started yelling, pressing his face close to the glass, his mouth moving furiously. I couldn't hear a single word he was saying, but his expression was pure rage. The people near the booth were starting to stare, wondering what the commotion was. It was disrupting the flow, the atmosphere. I sighed internally. This was ridiculous. He tells me to lock the door and not open it for anyone, and then gets furious when I follow his instructions. It was a power play, a test, a pathetic display of his insecurity. I paused the music slightly again, though not completely off. Enough to hear him through the thick door. "Open the damn door, Alex," he screamed, his voice just audible over the beat. "Let me in." I looked at him, my patience wearing thin. "Mark," I said, speaking loudly so he could hear. "You told me to lock the door and not open it for anyone. That's what I'm doing." His face contorted. "Don't be a smartass. Open the door now." I hesitated for a moment. The rational part of my brain said, just open the door, de-escalate the situation, get through the night. But the other part, the part that was tired of his petty rules, his insecurity, his complete lack of respect for me and my job, that part was fed up. It felt like a trap. Either I disobeyed his direct order from earlier, or I disobeyed his current order. Either way, he would find a reason to be mad. He had set this up. He wanted in, he wanted to see who was at the booth, he wanted to exert his authority. And I was doing exactly what he told me to do. But the scene he was making was worse than just opening the door. People were watching. It was unprofessional, the manager of the club yelling at the DJ through a locked door. "Fine. I'll play your stupid game, Mark." I sighed again and reached for the lock. I unlocked the door and pulled it open just enough for him to squeeze through. He practically shoved his way in, his face inches from mine. He was breathing heavily from anger, his eyes narrowed to slits. "What the hell was that, Alex?" he spat. "Why didn't you open the door immediately? You're making a scene." I looked at him calmly, despite the adrenaline starting to pump through my veins. "I was doing what you told me to do, Mark. You specifically instructed me to lock the door and not let anyone in. Those were your exact words." He scoffed, a harsh, disbelieving sound. "Don't give me that crap. You knew I wanted to get in. I'm the manager. You should have opened the door for me." "But you said anyone, Mark," I said. "You didn't say anyone except you. Your instructions were very clear." He sputtered, unable to come up with a logical response because he knew I was right. He had painted himself into a corner with his own ridiculous rule. His anger wasn't about the rule, though. It was about the perceived insubordination, the fact that I hadn't instantly obeyed his whim. He couldn't handle being told no, especially not by someone he viewed as just hired help, a replaceable part of the resort machine. He looked around the small booth area as if expecting to find someone hiding in the shadows, evidence of my supposed misbehavior. There was no one. Just me, the equipment, and the thumping bass from the speakers. He turned back to me, his face a mask of fury. "That's it," he said, his voice low and trembling with rage. "I've had enough of your attitude, your insubordination. You're fired right now. Get out." I stared at him. The music was still playing, the crowd was still dancing, but in that tiny space inside the booth, everything went quiet for me. Fired for following his instructions, for doing exactly what he had ordered me to do just minutes before. I couldn't believe it. Was he serious? His expression left no doubt. He was beyond serious. He was incandescent with rage. He wanted me gone. "You're serious?" I asked, my voice flat. "Yes, I'm serious," he yelled. "You're done here. Pack your things and get out of my club." I felt a strange mix of shock and a sudden wave of clarity. This whole situation, the job, the resort, the constant moving, the dealing with people like Mark, it suddenly felt very small and very tiring. I looked past him out at the crowd, the hundreds of faces lit by the strobe lights all lost in the music. My music. And then I looked back at Mark, his face red and furious, the pathetic temporary king of his small domain. In that moment, I knew I wasn't just going to quietly pack my bags and slink away. He wanted a scene. He had created one. He wanted me out. Fine, but he would regret how he did it. A sudden calm settled over me. The unfairness of it all was staggering, but it also provided a strange kind of power. He thought he was punishing me by firing me, but he had actually just handed me a different path. I made a decision. It was impulsive, it was maybe a little dramatic, but it felt right. It felt like the only way to respond to such blatant injustice and incompetence. I turned away from Mark, ignored his fuming presence behind me, and faced the crowd. I reached for the master volume control. Slowly, deliberately, I began to lower the music. The bass receded, the melody faded, the energy in the room started to drop. Faces in the crowd looked up, confused, wondering why the music was dying. The lights still pulsed, but the driving beat that had fueled the party was gone. A hush started to fall over the room, replaced by the murmur of voices and the shuffling of feet. When the music was low enough that I could be heard clearly over the background noise, I leaned into the microphone, the one I used to occasionally hype the crowd or make announcements. My voice was calm, maybe a little sad, but firm. I looked out at all those expectant faces. "Hey everyone," I said, my voice amplified through the massive sound system. "I'm really sorry to have to do this, but I have an announcement." There was a collective murmur of confusion from the crowd. Mark was behind me, stammering something, probably telling me to shut up, but I ignored him completely. "I've just been fired," I continued, my voice echoing through the club, "for following instructions I was given by the manager just a little while ago. So unfortunately, my set is over. I have to close things up and walk out." I paused, letting that sink in. You could feel the confusion and disappointment ripple through the crowd. Some people looked angry, others looked shocked. I saw a few people point towards the booth, probably having witnessed Mark yelling at me, "Sorry again, everyone. Have a good night." And with that, I turned off the main sound system completely. The club went silent except for the residual buzz of conversation and the faint clinking of glasses from the bar. The abrupt silence after hours of pulsating music was deafening. I didn't look at Mark. I didn't need to. I could feel his disbelief and probably dawning horror behind me. I started neatly coiling my headphone cable. I gathered my laptop and my small bag of essentials from the booth. I did it slowly, deliberately, not rushing. I was taking my time. I had nowhere else to be immediately. This wasn't just walking out, it was a performance, a quiet protest against the absurdity of the situation. I zipped up my bag, slung it over my shoulder. Then I walked out of the booth through the door Mark had just demanded I open, then demanded I lock, and walked out of the nightclub, leaving Mark standing there in the awkward silence of a party prematurely ended. As I walked away from the club, through the resort lobby, and out into the cold Colorado night, I felt a strange sense of liberation mixed with uncertainty. I had just been fired. My job was gone, my immediate future was uncertain. I was miles from home with no clear plan. But I also felt a surge of defiant satisfaction. I hadn't just been fired, I had made a point. I had exposed Mark's petty tyranny for everyone to see, or at least hear. It wasn't much, but it was something. I found my way back to the small basic room the resort provided for staff. It felt different now. It wasn't just a temporary place to crash between shifts, it was limbo. I sat on the edge of the bed, the silence of the room a stark contrast to the noise of the club I had just left. What now? The resort had rules about staff leaving. If you quit, you were responsible for your own travel home. Given how far away I was, that would be expensive, especially on short notice around the holidays. Plane tickets would cost a fortune. But if you were fired, the company was responsible for getting you home. That was the rule. A rule designed maybe to protect them from legal issues, but in this case it protected me. Mark in his short-sighted rage had forgotten, or perhaps never even knew, that rule. He thought firing me was the ultimate punishment. But it wasn't. It was a transfer of financial responsibility from me to the company. And because it was the absolute peak of the holiday travel season, getting a last-minute flight anywhere, let alone cross-country, was nearly impossible. I knew this because I had looked into flying home for Christmas myself before deciding to stay and work. This realization settled over me, a small but significant victory in the face of a crushing defeat. I might be fired, I might be stranded temporarily, but they had to pay for it. They had to house me, feed me, and eventually get me home. It was the consequence of Mark's impulsive and idiotic decision. The next morning, I went down to the staff management office. Mark wasn't there, thankfully. I spoke to one of the human resources people, a tired-looking woman named Brenda. I explained the situation calmly, omitting the dramatic mic drop part. I just said I was fired by Mark last night. Brenda looked surprised. She clearly hadn't been informed yet or hadn't expected me to show up. She checked my file, looked at the temporary manager notes, probably saw Mark's scribbled termination notice. She sighed. "Yes, Alex, I see here that Mr. Mark has terminated your employment." I nodded. "So I understand that means the company is responsible for my travel back home?" I asked, keeping my voice polite and neutral. She looked at her computer screen, typing for a moment. Her expression turned to one of mild annoyance. "Well, yes, that's the policy." However, she paused, looking up at me. "As you know, it's the busiest travel time of the year. Flights are completely booked, especially out of a smaller airport like the one near us. We're having trouble finding anything for at least a week, maybe longer." I nodded again, as if this was news to me, though it was exactly what I had anticipated. "I understand," I said. "So what does that mean?" She sighed again. "It means you'll have to remain here at the resort until we can secure a flight for you. The company will continue to provide your staff accommodation and a daily stipend for food." "I see. And how long do you think that might be?" I asked, trying to sound patient, not eager. She shrugged. "We'll keep checking cancellations, but honestly, Alex, it could be 7 to 10 days, maybe longer." I kept a straight face. "All right," I said. "I understand. Please just let me know as soon as you find something." Brenda looked at me sympathetically. "I'm really sorry about this, Alex," she said. "This is a very unusual situation." I just smiled slightly. "It is what it is, Brenda. Thank you for your help." I left the office feeling a quiet thrill. 7 to 10 days, maybe longer. Stuck at a ski resort during peak season with my room and food paid for and nothing to do. All because a petty tyrant fired me for following his own absurd rule. This was turning out to be better than any vacation I could have planned. It was the universe delivering a small slice of justice. It wasn't the revenge I had imagined back in the Silent Club, but it was a consequence Mark had unleashed, and I was going to enjoy it. The next week was surreal. I was still at the resort, but I was no longer working. I was a ghost in the machine. I could go skiing if I wanted, though I mostly just stayed around the main resort area observing. I saw Mark around sometimes. He would see me usually by the coffee shop or in the lobby, and his face would freeze. He looked uncomfortable, even angry, that I was still there, a living reminder of his hasty decision. I would just give him a small, polite nod, nothing more, nothing less. It drove him crazy, I could see it. He probably expected me to be gone immediately, a problem solved. Instead, I was still present, a constant low-level irritant. I heard whispers from some of the other staff who were friendly with me. They knew what had happened. They thought Mark was an idiot. They were quietly supportive. It felt good to know I wasn't the only one who saw him for what he was. The club continued, of course, with a different DJ. I would sometimes stand outside the doors listening. The music wasn't the same. The energy felt flatter. I saw some of the regular guests who used to come to the booth outside the club looking a bit lost. It wasn't my problem anymore, but I felt a pang of something, a mixture of missing the energy and a quiet satisfaction that my absence was felt. This period of forced inactivity was initially frustrating, but it slowly transformed into something else. It became a time of reflection. I thought a lot about my job, my life on the road. Was this really what I wanted? Bouncing from place to place, always temporary, always subject to the whims of temporary managers. The firing by Mark, as unfair as it was, had jolted me out of a routine. It forced me to stop to think. I realized that while I loved the music and the performance, I didn't love the instability, the lack of control over my own situation. Mark had taken away my job, but he had given me something else, clarity. And he had also given me time. A whole week or more with nothing to do but wait. I started using that time productively. I wasn't just going to sit around. This free week was paid for by the company because of Mark's actions. How else could I make them feel the cost of his incompetence? How could I make sure Mark faced some sort of consequence beyond my forced vacation? The resort company was a large corporation that owned multiple properties. Mark was just a temporary fill-in at one of them. Getting fired by him felt like being swatted by a fly, but the parent company, the one paying for my unexpected holiday, that was the real entity that needed to understand the ripple effects of hiring incompetent people like Mark. I decided to write a letter. Not just a complaint, a detailed account of everything that had happened. I would lay out Mark's arrival, his behavior, his specific instructions, to lock the booth door, my adherence to those instructions, his subsequent rage, and the public firing. I would highlight the company policy that required them to pay for my travel home if fired versus if I quit. I would point out the cost of my extended stay at the resort during peak season, all because of his decision. This letter wasn't just about getting Mark in trouble, it was about holding the company accountable for putting someone like him in a position of authority. It was about showing them the financial and human cost of poor management. I spent several days working on it. I drafted and redrafted. I wanted it to be factual, unemotional, just a clear, precise recounting of events and their consequences. I included dates, times, specifics. I mentioned the other staff who knew what had happened. I wanted it to be impossible to ignore or dismiss. I wasn't just complaining, I was presenting a case. While I was writing the letter, I also started observing Mark more closely from a distance. I saw him interacting with other staff members, sometimes snapping, sometimes trying too hard to seem in charge. I saw him struggling with aspects of the job that David handled effortlessly. He was out of his depth, and everyone knew it. He wasn't just a terrible manager, he was making things harder for everyone around him. This fueled my resolve. My letter felt less like revenge and more like necessary reporting. This wasn't just for me, it was for the other staff members who had to deal with him. As the days passed, my unexpected stay at the resort started to feel less like a punishment and more like a quiet triumph. I was living on their dime thanks to Mark. I would see guests enjoying themselves skiing, relaxing, completely unaware of the small drama that had unfolded in the nightclub. I felt like I had a secret, a piece of leverage. It was a strange situation to be in. I was an employee, technically still, though terminated, waiting to be sent away. I was still staying in staff housing, still eating in the staff canteen, still a part of the resort ecosystem, but detached. During this time, I spent a lot of hours just walking around the resort, observing, listening. I heard snippets of conversations, complaints from guests about things that seemed minor, but added up. I saw staff looking stressed and unhappy. It wasn't just Mark's impact on me, it was his impact on the whole atmosphere. This added more weight to my letter. It wasn't just about a DJ getting fired, it was about a manager creating a negative environment. Finally, after what felt like an eternity but was actually about 9 days, Brenda from HR called me. "We've found a flight for you, Alex," she said. "It's not direct, and it has a long layover, but it will get you home. It leaves in 2 days." "Okay," I said. "That works." She gave me the details. I confirmed. My time was almost up. I felt a mix of readiness to leave and a lingering satisfaction about how it had played out. The delay in getting me home had solidified my unexpected paid vacation. It had also given me the time to write the letter. I finished the final draft, printed it out. I addressed it to the head of resort operations at the corporate headquarters. I also printed a copy to mail to the Human Resources Department at corporate just to make sure it got seen. On my last day, I packed up my few belongings. I double-checked that I had everything. I walked through the resort one last time, the familiar sights and sounds feeling different now. I was leaving this chapter behind. I stopped by the resort's main reception desk on my way out to confirm my transportation to the airport. I saw Mark standing nearby, talking loudly on his phone, trying to sound important. He saw me and his face twitched. He ended his call abruptly. "Leaving, Alex?" he asked, trying to sound casual, but there was an edge to his voice. "Yes, Mark, leaving," I said. "My flight is today." He just nodded, not saying anything else. I thought about saying something more, something pointed, but decided against it. My letter would speak for me. I walked past him towards the exit. As I reached the doors, I paused. I turned back and looked at him. He was watching me. "Mark," I said loud enough so a few of the staff nearby could hear. "Thanks for everything, seriously. You really helped me out." He looked confused, taken aback. "What are you talking about?" he said. "You fired me." I smiled, a genuine smile. "Exactly," I said. "If you hadn't fired me, I would have had to pay my own way home. And with holiday prices, that would have cost me thousands. Because you fired me, the company had to pay for my flight, and they had to pay for me to stay here for over a week during peak season. It was a nice break. So yeah, thanks, Mark. You saved me a lot of money." His face went pale. The realization hitting him that his act of petty revenge had backfired spectacularly on his employer. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. I just nodded again, my smile widening slightly, and walked out the doors, leaving him standing there speechless in the middle of the lobby. It wasn't a mic drop. but it was a final word, a clear statement that his attempt to hurt me had only ended up costing the company and benefiting me. Outside, the resort car was waiting to take me to the airport. As I got in, I slipped the 2 copies of my letter into a nearby mailbox. One for corporate operations, one for corporate HR. My message was on its way. The journey home was long and tiring, but the feeling of having handled the situation on my own terms made it bearable. I wasn't just a victim of an unfair firing, I had turned it into something else. A paid vacation and a calculated response. I settled back into life back home. It felt strange after a year of constant travel. I started looking for my next gig, but with a clearer idea of what I wanted and didn't want. A few weeks went by. I hadn't heard anything about the resort or Mark. I wondered if my letter had even been read. Maybe it had just ended up in a pile of ignored correspondence. Then one day I received an email. It was from Brenda, the HR woman at the resort. The subject line was simple inquiry regarding your departure. I opened it cautiously. It was polite, asking me to call her at my convenience regarding some follow-up questions about my employment termination. I felt a flicker of anticipation. My letter had clearly landed somewhere. I called Brenda the next day. She sounded a little nervous on the phone. "Alex," she said, "thank you for calling. We received your letter here, and a copy was also sent to corporate. They have some questions about the circumstances surrounding your termination." I answered her questions calmly and factually, recounting the same details from my letter. I didn't exaggerate, I didn't badmouth Mark more than necessary, I just stated the facts. About Mark's order to lock the booth, the fact that I followed it, his anger, his public firing of me, the company policy regarding fired employees' travel, and my extended stay at the resort at the company's expense. Brenda listened intently. She didn't offer much comment, just asked clarifying questions. At one point, she said, "So you were effectively given a paid vacation at the resort for over a week because you were fired?" "Yes," I confirmed. "That's correct." Because securing a flight during peak season was difficult, the company policy meant you had to provide accommodation and a per diem until you could arrange travel. "Is that right?" "That's right, Brenda," I said. "That's what I was told by your office." The call ended politely. I wasn't sure what would happen next, if anything. But the fact that corporate was asking questions meant my letter had done its job. I had put the spotlight on Mark's poor decision-making and its direct cost to the company. More weeks passed. I was starting to get some leads on potential new DJ work. Then I received another email, this one from a corporate human resources address. It was short and to the point. "Dear Mr. Alex, this email is to follow up on your recent correspondence regarding your employment at the Colorado resort. We have reviewed your account and conducted an internal investigation. Please be advised that Mr. Mark is no longer employed by the resort company. We take matters of employee conduct and adherence to policy very seriously. We apologize for any negative experience you may have had during your time with us. Sincerely, corporate HR." I read the email several times. Mark was gone. Fired. My letter had done it. It wasn't a dramatic showdown, it wasn't a public humiliation on the scale of what he had done to me, but it was effective. He had lost his job, his temporary power, his chance to climb the ladder within that company. And the reason was directly linked to how he had treated me, how his incompetence had cost the company money. It was quiet, satisfying justice. I hadn't sought revenge out of pure malice, but out of a need to correct an injustice and to make sure that kind of behavior had consequences. And it did. Mark's firing by corporate was a clear message that his actions were unacceptable and costly. It felt good to know that standing up for myself, even in that quiet, methodical way, had worked. It confirmed that while some people might wield temporary power poorly and unfairly, there were often higher levels where accountability existed. My time at the resort had ended abruptly and unfairly, but the way it concluded, with a free week and the downfall of the petty manager, felt like a fitting and satisfying resolution. It taught me a valuable lesson about finding leverage in unexpected places and the power of documentation and persistence. Sometimes the best revenge isn't loud and explosive, but quiet, calculated, and aimed right at the source of the problem. As I moved forward with my career, I carried that lesson with me. I continued to pursue my passion for music and DJing, but with a renewed sense of self-worth and a refusal to let myself be treated poorly. The experience with Mark and the resort was a bump in the road, but it ultimately led me to a better place. It made me stronger and smarter. And I never forgot the feeling of walking out of that club, knowing I had turned a moment of humiliation into a platform for quiet, effective payback. It was a reminder that even in the face of unfairness, you can find a way to reclaim your power and ensure that actions have consequences. And sometimes the most satisfying revenge is simply letting someone else's incompetence lead to their own undoing, while you reap an unexpected benefit. That stay at the resort funded by Mark's foolish decision became a symbol of that principle for me. Subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily.